A simple couple is kicked out of a jewelry store. Seconds later, their wealth shocks everyone. Jack and Sarah had always lived their lives quietly and without fanfare. They weren't the type of people who sought attention, nor did they enjoy being in the spotlight. Instead, they preferred the comfort of simplicity and the joy that came with living humbly. It wasn't that they couldn't afford a lavish lifestyle. It was simply that they chose not to flaunt their success. After all, the money they had earned over the years was the result of hard work and long hours, not the type of inheritance that would make anyone famous. They had met many years ago, back when they were both still young and just starting out in the world. They had fallen in love quickly, but their journey together had been anything but easy. Early on, they faced struggles that many young couples could relate to. The challenge of paying bills, the pressure of finding stable jobs, and the constant balancing act between dreams and reality. However, through it all, Jack and Sarah had one thing that kept them going: each other. Their bond was unbreakable, and they worked tirelessly to create a future that would one day allow them to live the life they had always dreamed of. As the years went on, their efforts paid off. Jack had started a small business in the tech industry, focusing on software development, while Sarah, a creative soul, had her own line of handmade furniture that she sold online. Together, they had built a comfortable life, one that included a lovely home, a few vacations each year, and enough financial freedom to not worry about the next paycheck. They had quietly become wealthy, but no one knew it. Their friends and family still saw them as the same couple who had started out in a modest apartment, working overtime and doing everything they could to make ends meet. On a sunny afternoon, the couple decided to treat themselves. They had always admired the beauty and elegance of high-end jewelry, but they had never felt the need to buy anything extravagant. However, today was different. Sarah had a birthday coming up, and Jack thought it might be nice to surprise her with something special, something that could represent the many years they had spent together, building their lives from the ground up. After all, they had earned it, hadn't they? And it was time to reward themselves for the hard work they had put into their businesses. The jewelry store they chose was one of the most prestigious in town. The windows gleamed with displays of diamonds, gold, and platinum, beautiful, sparkling pieces that made it clear this was no ordinary store. Jack had never been to a place like this before, and he wasn't sure what to expect. He had heard the whispers about such stores, about how they catered to the wealthy elite, and how the staff could sometimes look down on those who didn't fit the proper image. But Jack and Sarah weren't worried. They didn't need to impress anyone. They just wanted to find something meaningful to mark the occasion. When they walked into the store, they immediately felt the atmosphere shift. It was quiet, too quiet almost. The walls were lined with glass cases displaying sparkling jewels, and soft, ambient music played in the background. Jack and Sarah's simple attire, jeans, t-shirts, and comfortable shoes, seemed to contrast with the opulence of the place. They felt a bit out of place, but they tried not to let it show. Sarah nudged Jack, a playful smile on her face. "Let's see if we can find something beautiful," she said, and Jack nodded in agreement. They made their way toward the back of the store, where the high-end pieces were displayed. The first thing that caught their eye was a stunning necklace, simple yet elegant. It wasn't too flashy, but the diamonds caught the light in a way that made it seem almost magical. Sarah's eyes lit up as she examined the piece, and Jack couldn't help but notice how beautiful it looked against her skin. He had always thought she was stunning, but in that moment she looked even more radiant. This was the perfect gift, he thought. He wanted to give her something she could wear every day, something that would remind her of their love and their journey together. Just as they were admiring the necklace, a well-dressed woman approached them. She was tall and slender, with a perfectly styled bob haircut, and her eyes seemed to scan them up and down before landing on their faces. There was an air of aloofness about her that immediately put Jack on edge. She greeted them with a forced smile. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice smooth but distant. Jack, who was never one to feel uncomfortable in a situation, immediately felt a twinge of unease. There was something in the woman's tone, something unspoken, that made him wonder if they were being judged. Sarah smiled politely and nodded. "We're just looking," she said, her voice warm but casual. The woman's gaze lingered on them for a moment, and then she glanced over her shoulder toward the front of the store, as if to make sure no one important was watching. "I see," the woman said. If you're looking for something more affordable, I'd recommend trying a different store. We only carry the finest, high-end pieces here." Her words were polite, but the undertone was unmistakable. She was subtly implying that Jack and Sarah didn't belong there, that they couldn't afford what the store had to offer. For a brief moment, Jack's chest tightened. He had heard stories of people being treated differently in places like this, being judged based on the clothes they wore or the car they drove. But he never expected it to happen to them. They had worked hard for everything they had. They didn't need to prove their worth to anyone. Yet here they were, feeling small and insignificant in the face of this woman's subtle disdain. Sarah, ever the optimist, took a deep breath and looked the woman in the eye. "We'll take a look around," she said calmly, her voice steady. The woman nodded dismissively and walked away without another word. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look, both feeling the weight of the moment. Neither of them said anything, but the air felt thick with unspoken words. For a moment they stood there, unsure of what to do. The store was beautiful and the jewelry was stunning, but the experience had already soured. Jack could see the disappointment in Sarah's eyes, and he hated that this was how their special day was unfolding. He wanted to give her something beautiful, but now it felt as though they were being told they didn't deserve to be there. They decided to leave. As they walked toward the exit, they noticed the other customers in the store glancing at them, some with curiosity, others with obvious judgment. Jack felt a pang of frustration, but he didn't let it show. He knew what was happening. They weren't wearing designer clothes, and they didn't fit the mold of the typical customer who walked into this high-end jewelry store. But that didn't mean they weren't worthy of being there. It didn't mean they didn't deserve to enjoy the fruits of their labor, just like anyone else. With a quiet nod to Sarah, Jack opened the door and stepped out of the store. The cool air hit their faces, and they walked down the street in silence. Sarah squeezed his hand, and for a moment everything felt all right again. They didn't need to buy a necklace to prove anything to anyone. They had each other, and that was enough. But little did they know, the story was far from over. As Jack and Sarah walked out of the jewelry store, they both felt a heavy silence between them. The disappointment of the experience was hard to shake. They had just walked into the store with hopes of finding something beautiful to mark a special occasion. What they hadn't expected was to feel unwelcome, almost as though they didn't belong in a place that sold luxury goods. The entire situation left a sour taste in their mouths. Sarah, always the more optimistic of the two, tried to brush it off with a smile. She reached over and squeezed Jack's hand, offering him a reassuring look. "It's okay," she said softly. "We don't need to prove anything to them." Jack smiled back, grateful for her steadying presence. "I know," he replied, "but it still stings, doesn't it? We've worked hard for everything we have, and they treated us like we were nothing." "I know," Sarah agreed, her voice carrying a hint of frustration. "But we've got each other. We don't need anyone else's approval. We're doing just fine on our own." Jack nodded, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had somehow tainted the day. They had wanted to mark this milestone with something special, but now, instead of celebrating, they were walking away from an unpleasant experience. He glanced over at Sarah, her face still glowing with the warmth and kindness that had always drawn him to her. He loved her more than anything, and he was grateful for her perspective, but he couldn't help but feel that the encounter had left a mark. As they walked along the street, Jack noticed a sleek black car slowly approaching them. He didn't think much of it at first, but as the car pulled up alongside them, it stopped. The driver's side window rolled down and a man's voice called out. "Excuse me, are you Jack and Sarah?" the man asked, his tone polite but firm. Jack and Sarah both stopped in their tracks, surprised by the sudden interruption. Jack looked at Sarah, his eyebrows raised in confusion. "Yes, that's us. Can we help you?" he asked, wondering who this stranger could be. They certainly didn't recognize the man behind the wheel. The man smiled warmly. "I'm sorry to stop you like this," he said, "but I've been following your progress for quite some time. My name is David, and I represent an exclusive investment firm. I've heard a lot about your success, and I think you might be interested in what we have to offer." Jack and Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance. They had been successful in their own businesses, but they were far from being public figures. Jack had never imagined that someone would be tracking their success, let alone approach them on the street. Sarah, ever the curious one, was the first to speak. Thank you, but we're not really interested in anything right now," she said, her voice polite but cautious. David raised his hands in a gesture of reassurance. I understand, but if you could just hear me out for a moment, I think you'll find what I'm offering very interesting. He paused for a moment, his expression turning serious. You've built an empire, and I think it's time for you to take it to the next level. Jack felt his curiosity begin to grow. He had always believed in the value of hard work and smart investments, but he had never thought about expanding his business in the way this man was suggesting. They had always kept things small and personal, and the idea of something bigger was a bit intimidating. But still, there was something about David's demeanor that piqued Jack's interest. David continued, I know what you're thinking. You're probably wondering why someone like me would approach a couple like you. But the truth is, I've been following your work for years. I've seen your businesses grow, and I've seen the way you've managed to keep everything so grounded. That's exactly why I think you're ready for the next step. You have what it takes, and I can help you take it to a whole new level. Jack and Sarah were quiet for a moment, absorbing what David had said. Neither of them had expected this kind of attention today, but something about the way he spoke made them think that he wasn't just trying to sell them something. He genuinely seemed to believe in their potential. Are you saying that you want to work with us? Jack asked, still uncertain about the situation. What exactly is it that you think we could do next? David smiled, his eyes lighting up. Exactly that, he said. I believe you have the potential to take your businesses global. You've done it all on your own so far, and I think it's time to take things further. My firm specializes in connecting successful entrepreneurs with exclusive opportunities. With our help, you could expand your businesses, get involved in high-end markets, and create a legacy that will last for generations. Jack and Sarah were taken aback by the idea of expansion. They had always been content with their lives the way they were. They hadn't actively sought out anything beyond their existing businesses, and they had never been interested in becoming part of the elite circles that David seemed to be suggesting. But as they listened to him, they began to wonder, could they really take their businesses to the next level? And if they did, what kind of future would they be creating for themselves and for their family? David continued, sensing their hesitation. I know this is a big step, and it's not something you have to decide right now, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to think about it. If you're interested, I can arrange a meeting with my team, and we can discuss the possibilities in more detail. You've already accomplished so much on your own, and with the right resources, I believe you can go even further. There was a long pause as Jack and Sarah processed everything David had just said. They had always been fiercely independent, building their businesses from the ground up with no outside help. They hadn't relied on investors or taken loans. They had simply worked hard, day by day, to create something they could be proud of. But now here was an opportunity, an offer to join forces with someone who believed in them, someone who could help them achieve things they had never even imagined. Finally, Sarah spoke. I think we'd like to hear more, she said, her voice thoughtful. But we're going to need some time to think about it. David nodded. Of course, I'll leave you with my contact information. Take all the time you need. I'm confident that when you're ready, we'll be able to do something extraordinary together. He handed Jack a business card, and with a polite nod, he got back into his car and drove off, leaving Jack and Sarah standing there on the sidewalk, still processing everything that had just happened. As they continued walking down the street, Jack and Sarah didn't speak immediately. The entire exchange had been so unexpected, so surreal that neither of them knew quite how to react. But as they walked, they began to realize something. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about possibilities, the kind of possibilities they had never allowed themselves to dream about. It was about the future. For the first time that day, Jack felt a spark of excitement. Jack and Sarah stood in the quiet of the street for a few moments, still processing the strange turn of events. They had just been approached by a man claiming to represent an exclusive investment firm, offering them an opportunity to expand their businesses and take things to a level they had never imagined. The idea was both exciting and overwhelming. For years, they had built everything they had on their own terms, without any outside interference. The thought of opening their doors to a new world of possibilities was daunting, but at the same time, it stirred something inside them, something that made them wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were ready for something more. As they continued walking down the street, the conversation from moments ago lingered in their minds. David had seemed genuine, and his words had struck a chord. The offer to work with an investment firm to expand their businesses into new markets was a big step. But was it the right one? Sarah, who had always been the more thoughtful of the two, was the first to speak. "What do you think, Jack?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Jack turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. He had always been the dreamer in their relationship, the one who imagined all the possibilities, but Sarah was the steadying force. She was the one who kept their feet firmly planted on the ground, even when things got exciting or overwhelming. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "It's a lot to take in. We've always done things our way, and now someone offering us something big, something we didn't even think we needed. I've never really considered expanding beyond what we already have, but I can't deny that it sounds tempting." Sarah nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. Their lives had been comfortable, steady, and predictable. They didn't have to worry about the pressures of growth or competition. But now, this opportunity had opened a new door, one that led to a future they had never truly imagined. "What would it mean for us, though?" Sarah asked, more to herself than to Jack. "If we took this step, how would it change things? Would we still have the same freedom we've worked so hard for? Or would it be all about the numbers and the pressure of success?" Jack stopped walking and turned to face her, the weight of her question sinking in. "I guess that's what we'd have to figure out," he said. "We've always been in control, but if we bring someone else in, if we trust them to guide us, then it's going to be a lot different. I don't want to lose what we've built, but I also don't want to turn down something that could make a real difference." Sarah smiled softly, a gentle laugh escaping her lips. "You've always been the one to dream big," she teased. "Now I'm the one asking the questions." Jack chuckled. "Well, I think that's why we make a good team. You keep me grounded and I keep you thinking bigger. Maybe it's time for us to think bigger together." The thought of expanding their businesses was both thrilling and terrifying. They had always done things on their own terms, with no investors or corporate pressure. But perhaps it was time for a change. Maybe they had reached a point where they needed to consider the bigger picture, the legacy they could create, the impact they could have. Jack and Sarah had always been a team, and whatever decision they made, they would make it together. As they walked home, the conversation shifted to practical matters. They talked about the possibilities and what it might mean for their business. Jack was eager to learn more about the investment firm and how they could help. Sarah, ever cautious, wanted to do more research before making any decisions. They both agreed that they needed to be sure about what they were getting into. That evening, as the sun began to set and the city settled into its usual rhythm, Jack sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop. Sarah was in the living room reading a book, but Jack could tell she was just as intrigued by the prospect of expanding as he was. He typed in the name of the firm David had mentioned and began reading through the information that came up. The more he read, the more he realized that this was a serious opportunity. The firm had a long track record of helping entrepreneurs grow and succeed. They specialized in working with businesses just like theirs, small, independent, yet poised for growth. As Jack read, he felt a sense of excitement building inside him. This was the kind of opportunity they had worked so hard for, but never had the courage to seek out. Now it seemed to have found them. He called Sarah over to look at the screen. "This is the firm," he said, showing her the website. "Look at all the businesses they've worked with. These are exactly the kind of companies we could be working with if we take the plunge." Sarah glanced at the screen, her brow furrowed in thought. "It all looks impressive," she said slowly. "But we've built something that's ours, Jack. We've kept it small and we've kept it personal. Are we ready to change that? Are we ready to give up some of that control?" Jack sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the screen. "I don't think we'd be giving up control," he said, his voice steady. "We'd just have more resources, more opportunities to make a bigger impact, but we'd still be the ones making the decisions." "We wouldn't lose who we are." Sarah nodded, but she was still unsure. "I want to believe that," she said, "but I don't want us to get lost in the numbers, to lose sight of why we started this in the first place." Jack smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I promise we won't lose sight of that," he said softly. "Whatever we decide, we'll make sure it stays true to what we've built together." The next day, Jack called David to set up a meeting. He was eager to hear more, to get a sense of what the firm could offer them. David was pleased to hear from him and quickly arranged a time for them to meet. Jack and Sarah agreed that they would go together. This was a decision they would make as a team, just like everything else. As the meeting approached, Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what their future could hold. He pictured their business growing, expanding into new markets, and becoming something bigger than they had ever imagined. But at the same time, he worried about losing the sense of intimacy and control that had made their business so special in the first place. Sarah, on the other hand, was still cautious. She wasn't sure if they were ready to take such a big leap. She worried about the pressures that came with success, the constant demands of being part of something bigger. She knew Jack had always been the dreamer, but she couldn't help but wonder if they had already achieved everything they needed to. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with both excitement and uncertainty. Jack and Sarah had always been able to handle challenges together, but this felt different. This was a decision that would shape their future, and they both knew it. As the day of the meeting arrived, they dressed in their best clothes, nothing too flashy, but enough to show respect for the opportunity. They wanted to be taken seriously, but they also wanted to remain true to who they were. The meeting was set for the afternoon, and as they arrived at the firm's office, they couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Inside the sleek modern building, they were greeted warmly by David and his team. The office was everything they had imagined, polished, professional, and filled with energy. Jack and Sarah took a seat at the conference table, and as the meeting began, they listened intently as David outlined the potential for their businesses. As they sat there, taking it all in, one thing became clear. This was the beginning of something new. Whether they decided to take the leap or not, their lives were about to change. The meeting had gone much better than Jack and Sarah had expected. David and his team were thorough, professional, and presented them with clear, actionable steps. They had shared insights into how their businesses could grow exponentially, what kinds of investments would be necessary, and how the firm could support them in reaching a global audience. It was the kind of opportunity Jack had always dreamed about, but Sarah was still reserved, her caution making her question everything. As they walked out of the sleek, glass-fronted office building, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. The firm had promised to support them at every step, with advice and expertise that would allow their small but successful businesses to scale. There was talk of partnerships, market expansion, and a future filled with new possibilities. The future they had been envisioning for so long was within their grasp. "I think we should do it," Jack said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the opportunity we've been working for. We have the chance to take our businesses to the next level." "I can't imagine passing it up." Sarah, however, wasn't quite ready to make that leap. She had listened intently throughout the meeting, but the idea of diving into a bigger world with so many moving parts felt overwhelming. The life they had built together had been one of control, quiet, steady growth without pressure from the outside. The possibility of bringing in investors and working on a much larger scale was thrilling, but it also carried a heavy weight of responsibility. "I know it sounds incredible," Sarah said, her voice steady but thoughtful. "But I can't help but wonder, what will it do to us? We've worked so hard to stay true to ourselves, to stay grounded. If we take this step, will we still be us?" Jack stopped walking and turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. "I mean, what if we lose sight of what made us successful in the first place?" Sarah replied, her eyes searching his for understanding. "What if, in trying to grow and expand, we end up sacrificing what matters most? Our values, our connection to each other, and the simplicity that we've enjoyed." Jack thought about this for a moment. It was a valid concern. They had always worked as a team, with a shared vision of how their lives should unfold. They had built their businesses without the pressure of competition or the noise of investors demanding results. It had been their choice to keep things simple, to live a life where they could balance work with their personal happiness. The thought of trading that stability for something more complex and unpredictable was frightening. But Jack had always believed that to grow, you had to take risks. And now, it felt as though the world was offering them the chance to grow, to push past the boundaries they had set for themselves. They didn't have to give up their values. They could expand while still staying true to who they were. They could maintain control, work with people who respected their vision, and build something that would last. "I think we can do both," Jack said finally, his voice filled with determination. "We don't have to lose ourselves in the process. We can still be the couple who works together, who values simplicity and authenticity. But this opportunity is too big to ignore. We can grow without changing who we are." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening. She had always trusted Jack's judgment, and while the idea of change was daunting, she also knew that they couldn't stand still forever. They had worked so hard to get to this point, and maybe it was time to embrace the future, even if it was a little scary. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe we don't have to change everything. We can still stay true to ourselves while taking this next step. I just need to know we'll still have the freedom to make our own choices." Jack reached out and took her hand. "We will," he said, his voice confident. "We'll still have control. But we'll have the resources to do things we've never dreamed of. This isn't just about business growth. It's about creating a future where we can help others, where we can make a real difference." Sarah smiled, the worry in her eyes beginning to fade. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's do it. Let's take this step together." The decision was made. Jack and Sarah had agreed to move forward with the investment firm, but with one condition. They would remain in control of their businesses, and they would ensure that their values would not be compromised. This wasn't just about financial success. It was about building a legacy that reflected the principles they had always held dear. In the following weeks, everything seemed to move quickly. The firm arranged for them to meet with other entrepreneurs who had worked with them, and Jack and Sarah listened carefully to their stories. They learned about the challenges and rewards of expansion, how businesses could grow while still maintaining their core identity. They learned how to navigate the delicate balance between growth and authenticity, between ambition and preservation. But the real turning point came when David introduced them to a high-profile partnership opportunity, one that involved a luxury brand that had been struggling to connect with its audience. They were looking for a fresh approach, a new perspective. Jack and Sarah saw this as the perfect chance to showcase their businesses on a larger stage. They knew they could bring something unique to the table, a sense of authenticity that the luxury brand had been missing. As the partnership began to take shape, Jack and Sarah felt a sense of excitement. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. They were taking their businesses to the next level, but they were doing it on their terms. The deal was solid, the goals aligned with their values, and the future felt promising. Yet, even with all the success and progress, they never lost sight of the simplicity that had always defined their lives. They continued to spend time together, enjoying the quiet moments that had always been their foundation. They didn't get lost in the rush of business meetings or the pressure to keep up with the demands of expansion. Instead, they made sure to create space for the things that truly mattered, time spent with each other, enjoying the peace of their home, and finding joy in the little things that had always brought them happiness. As their businesses began to thrive in new ways, Jack and Sarah never forgot the lesson they had learned that day when they were turned away from the jewelry store. It wasn't about the clothes you wore or the image you projected. It was about who you were and what you stood for. And no matter how far they went, they would always stay true to themselves. Their journey had only just begun. The future was bright, filled with possibilities they had never imagined. But they were ready for it, together. As weeks turned into months, Jack and Sarah found themselves adjusting to the changes that had come with their decision. Their partnership with the investment firm had opened doors they hadn't even known existed. They had started working with other entrepreneurs, learning from their successes and failures, and applying that knowledge to their own businesses. It felt like they were part of a larger world now, but in many ways they remained the same. A couple who cherished their time together, who valued simplicity and authenticity, and who never lost sight of what really mattered. Their business had grown at an unexpected pace. The new partnership they had entered with the luxury brand was beginning to bear fruit. They had successfully launched a product line that was gaining attention, and they were being invited to high-profile industry events. The once small, independent operation that Jack and Sarah had built from the ground up was now recognized by people who were shaping the future of the industry. They had earned the respect they had always dreamed of, but they hadn't let it change who they were. They still worked side by side, making decisions together and taking time to reflect on their progress. But as with any success, there were challenges to face. The pressure of managing a growing business was immense. They had expanded their operations, hired new teams, and began to navigate the complexities of international markets. As they entered new territories, they encountered new obstacles, from navigating unfamiliar regulations to learning how to manage larger teams and resources. The excitement of expansion was tempered by the reality of what it took to keep everything running smoothly. There were moments when they both felt overwhelmed, unsure of whether they had made the right choice. But through it all, they supported each other, finding strength in their partnership and the shared vision they had always held. One of the hardest challenges they faced came when they were invited to an exclusive industry gala, a prestigious event that gathered the most successful business leaders and entrepreneurs from around the world. It was an honor to be included, but it also left them feeling out of place. As they arrived at the venue, they couldn't help but feel the weight of the room. The glitz and glamour of the event were unlike anything they had experienced before. People in expensive suits and dresses mingled effortlessly, speaking in terms they had never fully understood. It was a world of wealth and influence, a world they had only observed from the outside. "Do we really belong here?" Sarah whispered to Jack as they entered the venue, her eyes scanning the room. Jack squeezed her hand gently, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "We're here because we've earned it," he said softly. "We built this together. And we're not going to lose who we are just because we're in a room full of people with different values." As they made their way through the event, Jack and Sarah felt the contrast between the polished, high-society atmosphere and the simple, grounded life they had worked so hard to create. It was easy to feel like outsiders, to feel that they didn't quite fit in with the crowd. But instead of feeling intimidated, they found strength in their own authenticity. They didn't have to pretend to be something they were. They had built their success on hard work, humility, and a commitment to doing things their way. And that was enough. As the evening went on, they were approached by a number of people, some genuinely curious about their business and others simply trying to make connections. They shared stories, exchanged ideas, and for the first time in a long time, Jack and Sarah began to see the full scope of what they had accomplished. Their company had reached a level of success that few ever did, but it wasn't just about the financial rewards. It was about the impact they had made, the people they had helped along the way, and the lives they had touched. At one point, a well-dressed man approached them, introducing himself as the CEO of a major investment firm. He complimented them on their success and asked about their future plans. The conversation felt different from the others, more genuine, more focused on their story rather than just numbers. As they spoke, Jack and Sarah realized that the journey they had been on was not just about building wealth. It was about building relationships, creating a network of people who shared their values, and helping others along the way. The evening ended with Jack and Sarah walking out of the venue, their minds buzzing with new ideas and perspectives. They had been nervous at first, unsure of how they would fit into this world. But by the end of the night, they realized that they didn't have to fit in. They had already carved out a place for themselves, one where they could grow and succeed while staying true to who they were. Back at home, they reflected on everything that had happened. The event had been a turning point for them. It was a reminder that success wasn't just about numbers or recognition. It was about staying grounded and focused on what truly mattered. They had learned that they could continue to grow and expand, but they didn't have to sacrifice their integrity or their values in the process. As they sat down together, Sarah smiled at Jack. "I think we're doing okay," she said, her voice filled with pride. Jack nodded, a contented smile crossing his face. "We're doing more than okay," he said. "We're doing exactly what we set out to do. We've built something real, something that's ours, and we've done it together." In the months that followed, their business continued to grow, but so did their commitment to maintaining balance in their lives. They made sure to carve out time for each other, to enjoy the quiet moments that had always been the foundation of their relationship. They traveled, explored new interests, and found ways to give back to their community. They used their success not just for their own benefit, but to help others who were still working to build their dreams. Their story became an inspiration to others, proof that with hard work, dedication, and authenticity, anything was possible. Jack and Sarah's journey was a testament to the power of staying true to yourself, no matter the obstacles or challenges you faced. They had started out as a simple couple, quietly building a life together. And now, they were an example of what could happen when you dared to dream big and never lost sight of what was truly important. In the end, their wealth wasn't measured by the money they had accumulated, but by the lives they had touched, the legacy they had built, and the love they shared. The jewelry store that had once dismissed them was just a distant memory now, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had achieved. And as they looked ahead, Jack and Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. Their journey was far from over, but whatever the future held, they would face it together, with the same commitment to their values, their love, and their dream.